Okay, I only came from New Jersey, so it's a different story. Professor Gould's creative and cultural and critical practices explore the poetics of politics and the politics of poetry. But remember, Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish was also a political activist, so perhaps these things do have a real relevance together, and I look forward to learning more about that. Her exploration of literary, political, and legal theory emphasizes the literatures of the Islamic world and the Caucasus. Her most recent book is Erasing Palestine, Free Speech and Palestinian Freedom, that came out last year. In it, she takes on one of today's most contentious words, anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. This award-winning author has also written the Persian prison poem, Writers and Rebels, the Literatures of Insurgency in the Caucasus. So we see poetry and the arts, if I may, having a role to play in rebellion and revolution and the fight for independence and freedom. Her work has been translated into Chinese, Persian, Amharic, Russian, German, French, Spanish, Polish, Portuguese, and Serbian. And she's won many grants. She's also a translator and a poet on her own. Her own poetry was published in a book called Beautiful English. Today, Dr. Gould speaks about the practice of silencing and devaluing a system. The epistemicide, did I pronounce that right? Yeah. Epistemicide, side meaning the killing of, and epistemology meaning words. Knowledge. The epistemicide in Gaza, implications for free speech in Palestinian universities and across the Arab world. Dr. Gould.
All right, I think the microphone's working. Well, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I'm very delighted to be here, to be part of this event, which really speaks to my heart. Yeah, I'll definitely be focusing more on the political side of my work, but I'm glad to have the poetry referenced as well, because I see them as interconnected. Yeah, so actually, I'm beginning with a quote from Mahmoud Darwish. I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but yeah, who exemplifies the intersection of politics and poetry, in a particularly Palestinian context. So I am talking about looking at the question of free speech from the perspective of university life, speaking to recent research that I've been doing that's kind of a continuation of this book that was referenced, Erasing Palestine. Erasing Palestine is more focused on free speech in the Palestinian question in the context of Western democracies like the US and the UK. But as I was always working on that project, like Mustafa, I believe that free speech is actually a universal idea. You know, it's not something that we should just be concerned about in the West. And so I really wanted to do a project that, actually, let me just skip forward just a second. Yeah, to do a project that was looking at how is free speech understood in the Palestinian context of Palestine itself, the West Bank and Gaza? What are there differences? You know, because I think many of the values that we associate with the United States, with liberalism and so forth, are also held there. They're even held at a kind of, even without the ideological tradition necessarily, they're just, people want to express themselves freely. Yeah, so so that's sort of broadly the project that this is coming out of. But that project began a few months before the war on Gaza. And so since that has been happening, of course, you might imagine everything has changed in terms of how one goes about pursuing that research. So I'll be sort of talking about that research from the perspective of a changed world as I kind of struggle to make sense of it all. So yeah, but I think this is really appropriate to begin with this quote from Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian poet. This is from a prose poem that he wrote. He makes a very important point about sort of the role of universities in general in Palestinian or even Arab Islamic culture. So he says, as we don't know the difference between a mosque and a university because they are both from the same root in Arabic, why do we need the state? That's a provocation of sorts, since states pass just as surely as time. So that's I think, especially speaking to people who are associated with government or with politics, that I think that can be seen as a kind of provocation, a claim that actually it's the universities and the mosques that outlive the states. If you look at even just from the way the Arabic language is constructed. So I thought, I'm just going to give, these are sort of well-known facts, but it's worth saying that universities do have a particular importance in Palestinian life, Palestinian culture. The literacy rate in Palestine is among the highest in the world. And postgraduate degrees, attainment of postgraduate degrees is extremely high in Gaza. It's just and the West Bank, very common to come across people with PhDs. It's not like a anomaly. I think that's something that's maybe often missed from a lot of media reporting. You don't really hear about that very high level of cultural attainment, and Palestinians are known as the world's best educated refugees. Yes, and so here's the project that's ongoing, or really kind of just begun, and so I'm just going to read a little bit and then return to the slides. Just as I was embarking on a new research project funded by the Independent Social Research Foundation, Israel began its attack on Gaza. One by one, all of Gaza's universities were destroyed. The targeted nature of these attacks went beyond anything that had previously been seen in the Israel-Palestine conflict. When the project began, I was examining how the concept of free speech was defended in Palestinian universities, and I was also documenting, in coordination with colleagues in the West Bank, the challenges that faculty and students who exercise their free speech rights face, both as a result of the Israeli occupation as well as through internal forces of suppression, including both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. Among other aims, our goal was to compare the pressures on academic freedom between Gaza and the West Bank. So I wanted to see where's the pressure greater, what kinds of specific challenges do scholars and students face in those contexts, and also to understand what a specifically Palestinian approach to free speech might look like. And a lot of that research is being conducted with colleagues in An-Najah University in Nablus. And also briefly, again, before the war, I was working with students at the Islamic University of Gaza. Which is not, the building itself at least has been destroyed. I don't want to say the university doesn't exist, because it does, and it will be rebuilt, but the physical infrastructure is not there anymore. Yes, and I'll go through these slides in just a second, but one thing about the research that I was impressed by was just how important these concepts of academic freedom and free speech are, given that there's a lot of other problems if you're Palestinian in the West Bank, a lot of other things people struggle with, right? But they were willing to risk their safety and security to express themselves freely, and it was high on their list of priorities. We conducted surveys, in terms of what is most important, having a sustainable income or being able to express yourselves, those kinds of questions. And it was very, very high on their list of priorities. And also the extent of the crackdown on free speech was something that I was struck by, particularly I was more surprised by the extent of the crackdown in the West Bank universities under the Palestinian Authority. There are cases of targeted, or what was described to me as targeted assassinations by the Palestinian Authority of critics who had professors who had been critical of the regime, specifically Nizar, I'm just checking my time here, Nizar Banat, who was a intellectual in the West Bank, was critical of the Palestinian Authority and of the lack of freedom of expression. He was killed in 2021. Of course, the Palestinian Authority does not take responsibility, but it's widely believed that was a targeted murder. And another example is a professor at An-Najah University named Abdul Sattar Qasim, a professor of political science. He died of COVID, but that was after a long series of interrogations and detentions, again, very clearly linked to simply the fact that he was being critical of the government. That was it. There was no allegation of any kind of crime. Now, of course, so that was kind of, again, before October 2020. We live in a different world now. It's just, hopefully, all of you are familiar with with these images, what's been happening, there are no university buildings that are standing right now in Gaza. And so that's why I introduced that word epistemicide, which is the killing, silencing, annihilation, or devaluing of a knowledge system. You can see this is the destruction of the Islamic University of Gaza by Israel on 14 January. And then finally, this was the last university that was left standing. Al-Isra University is also not standing anymore. Again, I don't want to say the universities are gone because the people are there, the faculty, the ideas are there, but the infrastructure is not. And yeah, so these are just numbers from January. We have the large proportion of students that have been killed, teachers and administrators that have been killed, and I think, that's in the context, of course, of a broader genocide. But what's worth thinking about in this context is like this idea of the targeting of universities specifically as something that might be seen as threatening to Israel, and also as something that Palestinians would have a particular investment in wanting to preserve and save. Right, so before October 1st, I was already inclined to juxtapose the ways in which basic freedoms, including the right to education and the right to free speech, are taken for granted in liberal democracies, while they have to be robustly fought for to be recognized and protected in societies under occupation, such as Palestine. The war in Gaza has brought this dynamic to a new level of intensity. What is the meaning of free speech and academic freedom when an entire university is being destroyed? Not just one or two, but the very possibility of education in Gaza. I want to argue that even amid a genocide, the destruction of knowledge and the cultures of knowledge and other institutions should not be forgotten. In this context, an exclusive focus on humanitarian rights alone, in the absence of human rights, including education, would be dehumanizing to Palestinian targets of the genocide. So that's kind of the one aspect of the argument I want to make, that as much as we need to be thinking about the fact that people are starving to death, we also need to be thinking about the destruction of their cultural knowledge, and that kind of destruction persists across generations. Sure. So and then so again, back to my question: what is the point of free speech and academic freedom under conditions of genocide? Well, I would think we should kind of answer that question by considering what would the study of genocide look like apart from questions of free speech. As Palestinian scholar Esmaat al-Halabi has argued, genocide begins with the idea of genocide. He has a wonderful article that's I would recommend to everyone, published in the Baffler, about the history of Hebrew University, in particular in the long history of, so it's a nuanced article, but the long history in kind of serving as an incubator for some of the worst policies of the Israeli state, and also what the importance of universities are to Palestinians. This means that universities are not, so we need to look at it from multiple sides. Universities are not just spaces of intellectual inquiry, but they can also serve as incubators for ideologies that lead to genocide. And epistemicide matters to genocide as well as resistance to genocide because it is a constitutive part of it. It targets the conditions through which the cross-generational consequences of genocide can be overcome. So that, epistemicide seeks to make genocide into a permanent condition. And so now that I've sort of beginning to rethink my research project in light of October 2023, I want to focus also on the role that Palestinian institutions are playing in reviving the university sector in Gaza. So there's a very important initiative by Birzeit University in the West Bank. They already have 8,000 students enrolled in Gaza to enable their education to continue online, for example, and it's probably the most important initiative I'm aware of, at least, that's kind of directly responding to the targeting of universities by Israel. So it's definitely worth supporting. It's on their website. So Palestinian sources, in turn, also attest to the central roles of universities in the struggle for Palestinian liberation. One example of that is a novel by Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, that is really set at the sort of beginning of the creation of the Islamic University of Gaza. It's a site where these ideas of resistance are incubated. And in the novel, we witness the growth of the Islamic University of Gaza, the schools and networks of resistance between the West Bank and Gaza. And I would just sort of provocatively say, without really being able to have the time to flesh it out, that if without the siege on Gaza for 16 years, without this endless succession of wars waged by Israel against Gaza, perhaps these university spaces could have provided a really viable alternative to the turn to violence that eventually Hamas embraced. So in a broader sense, Palestinian anthropologist Khalil Nakhleh has argued in an important article in 1980 that the law in 1948 gave a special importance to education as a way of connecting Palestinians across diaspora and keeping alive a space for political transformation. So to conclude, for both the occupier and the occupied, universities matter. They're both targeted in the context of this genocide and also a particular site for cultural resistance and renovation. Academic freedom, the bedrock principle on which universities are founded through their role and through which their role in society is negotiated, is therefore an internal issue within the struggle for Palestinian freedom. Thank you very much.